to the Talent Optimization Podcast, the go-to podcast for CEOs and HR professionals wanting to bridge the gap between the strategy and tactical implementation of talent optimization within their organizations. Through interviews, predictive index, and personal experience, your host, Tracy Shirk, helps you discover the facets of talent optimization from both a CEO and HR perspective to truly create the dream team for your organization. Are you ready? Let's get started.
Welcome to Talent Optimization. Today, we are chatting about culture and the cultures that we create inside of our organizations, especially as our organizations are changing. So often our organizations are specifically changing because, well, COVID, right? So who I have on the podcast with me today is Shelley Taylor. And Shelley is with us from the Consortium for Educational Change, and that is a national nonprofit whose mission is to utilize continuous improvement and deep collaboration to help educational systems create the conditions for success and innovation. So Shelley, welcome to the show today.
Thank you, Tracy. It's a pleasure. Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. So when Shelley and I met, we had actually met as Shelley's organization was going through some significant changes themselves. And Shelley had just been promoted to the executive director position. So the shift in leadership and the shift in where do we need to go to best serve. And so we really worked together on kind of creating some of that psychological safety inside of the organization to create the culture. And I'm super curious, Shelley, tell us a little bit more about that and not only how you did that within CEC, but how that's reflective of your work inside the school districts.
Yeah, I was lucky to stumble into this organization where the key mission around deep collaboration and helping systems to innovate was already there for 34 years. So first off, just saying that that's really what we believe in as an organization. So therefore, we kind of need to walk our talk too. And when you look at restructuring, it's messy. And culture is very fragile in an organization. So while I say all the time, I train on tools to help folks collaborate well, I give advice and guidance and consult on how to build psychological safety. And we too need to do that. And I too, as a leader, need to remember those things and also use some of the tools that I even consult around to really help build that workforce. Because I will tell you, most especially, I've learned this by being an employee and now especially being an employer, is that if I want to really maximize what I'm getting from my employees, so really, I know this is silly to kind of talk about as a financial investment, but it really is, to really get a return on the investment in my employees. So I'm going to help them. I'm going to provide them professional development, all of the tools to make them successful. For me to get the best return is for me to ensure that there's a strong culture for them to grow, be their best selves every day, and really be efficient in the work that they do. So it's not only our mission and what we do to really help school systems think about that as well, but also I recognize that as just a value add for my organization.
I love it. And, there's a couple kind of keywords that you mentioned when you were talking there. One was culture, one was psychological safety. And I'm going to take a step back. And so often I do this when I'm consulting or training or leading, and I know you do as well, is, hey, do we all know what culture means? And are we all on the same page of that? And do we all know what psychological safety means? And are we all on the same page for that? So could you define that for us?
Sure. So when I'm using the term culture, and I think depending on different research and literature you're looking at, it's really around the tone, the expectation, the feel, the how different folks within the workforce interact with one another, sets expectations and sets how staff interact with each other. So to me, that's culture. And that's the part that can be very fragile. Every time you have one member change on a team, you might all of a sudden have a new culture. And then you have to really think about it, because does every new team member understand how we work together? Even we may have set norms on what happens in meeting times, but you get a new member in, does that person understand that? And if not, does it start to then change that expectation, which ultimately can change the culture? So that's the fragile part. Psychological safety is part of that. It's baked within how folks work with each other. It's one of the attributes of a highly collaborative organization. And in this particular term, psychological safety, which actually comes out of research from a woman named Amy Edmondson out of Harvard, and it's really related to how the safety of staff in terms of risk taking and sharing voice. And can I really go to my supervisor and tell them that I might have a dissenting idea or view or position about something? And do I feel as if I express that I will not be penalized or there will not be some sort of retribution put upon me? Why that's really important is because when your employees feel as though that they can share their thinking and that they have safety in voice and safety in being able to have a dissenting idea, it actually opens up innovation and creativity. You really get the most out of your employees when they're in that space. And especially when you want organizations to innovate. And you mentioned COVID. Oh my gosh, we all had to innovate. But if somebody brought an idea and felt as though their idea got slapped down, or they were somehow embarrassed or made to feel bad about anything around their idea they brought to the table, that's immediately going to signal to them, I should probably not bring any new ideas. I should probably stop that practice and just do what I'm told. And if I'm just going to do what I'm told, that may change their mindset in terms of who they see themselves in your organization. And so there's a lot of research and a great employer reason why you want to ensure psychological safety with your staff.
Absolutely. And do you have a specific story about how this really impacted inside of organizations, both the culture and the psychological safety, to actually meet those business results, which for you is student achievement, right? It's ensuring that those kiddos inside of our district become amazing adults in the way in which best utilizes their strengths.
I have several, but I'll pick one story.
Sure.
Because honestly, I work in educational settings, and educational settings in schools are just a petri dish for this not going well. Because culture and psychological safety and other attributes that have to do with highly functioning collaborative organizations all are based on one key factor: relationships. And relationships include humans. You cannot take humanity out of the humans. And so therefore, you really have just so many opportunities for things to maybe not go so well, especially in school systems, because most of our adults are not really trained or given just skill training around how to work with other people. Even though, especially in a school system, that's all we do is work with people every day. So the one example I'm going to give is a school building, one school. It was an elementary school that I was working with, pre-K to grade 6, and anywhere from around 80 staff members. And this building reached out because there was so much internal conflict between the teaching staff, between everybody. They just weren't getting along, which meant that there was a lot of drama and a lot of internal bickering and fighting. And then, of course, there were issues between the principal and some power dynamic struggles between that and the teachers. Then, of course, what ends up happening is then you get the teacher union involved. And now we're fighting for working conditions at this point. So they said, all right, we've got to bring someone in because things have not gone really well. Coming into that situation, recognizing that in many cases, these adults were kind of going into default mode of fight or flight, of I'm just trying to kind of do my job the best I can, but really not seeing themselves as part of a collaborative organization, and not really as did not have strong culture, and definitely did not have psychological safety. So, they all could tell their stories about what happened. But ultimately, when I came in, I really helped them by starting with saying, everybody, if you're an adult in this building, we're going to come together and we're really going to start unpacking the levels of culture and trust and how to rebuild and reset that, including just name it. It's okay. Nobody has to be perfect. And we need to really kind of start back over, have common tools and common language so that we can address conflict in a healthy way. I want to point out, and I tell everybody, which I think gives everybody a little bit of sense of relief, is that conflict is normal. And as a matter of fact, when you have that many humans in a room or in a building working together, yeah, it's going to happen. The question becomes is how do we deal with it professionally and in a healthy manner where we use that conflict back to that piece I mentioned about innovation that pushes us to innovation, that pushes us to new ideas where all voices are heard and those voices really can help with improvement efforts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that story. And as our work together, we're both working with school districts and whatnot, but it's looking at that and saying, our staff at that, I have to do this in order to get a paycheck curve, or am I at the engaged and I want to do this thing? And therefore I'm really going to push that engagement, right? And it's like, as we look at that, every single one of us is created perfectly the way we are. Yet we're not all created perfectly for a specific job or for a specific team or for a specific culture. And when we put these teams together, so often we're putting teams together of people that may be, incredibly detail oriented. And we also need a member on that team that's going to be so innovative and have zero detail skills whatsoever. So there's going to be that natural conflict. And when we know what that is from those tools, we can actually talk about it in a way of saying, black and white's telling me these are both of our strengths. How do we shift towards those strengths?
Yeah. And you see that in a lot of workplaces, but my experience in schools, especially, wow, that's really there because often educators get put into a position, a job where they spend a lot of time with young children, younger, not adults, and they don't actually, depending on the circumstance and the culture, forced to work with other adults and figure out how to navigate that. So then when they're like, oh, we're going to sit you on a team with a bunch of other adults and we're going to add inclusion and diversity and all these new things, it's sort of like they're not even really sure how to manage that. And so I think that that's really helpful. And I love the work, Tracy, that you do in terms of helping, number one, name it. I think it's naming your genius area, naming the strengths you bring, which often as adults, we don't really do. It feels a little self-centered, but to really be like, this is what I'm really good at, I think is an important piece to also bring to the table. And then to say, hey, I'm really good at this, but you're really good at that. Again, as adults, we're not always trained on how to navigate even those conversations at the basic level. And then so when conflict does come into place, then it's even a little bit more challenging. And often adults just avoid the situation. And I will tell you, avoiding the situation doesn't make it go away. And in many cases, it makes it worse. And I'll tell you, when you start to hear the drama and the griping, there's your red flag.
Yeah. Isn't it funny that like the biggest fears that we have really only come true when we ignore what's there because we're afraid it's going to happen, which just creates it.
Absolutely.
Which goes back to that communication piece and really respecting others based on the communication they have, right? Like we have a number of introverts in our organization and a number of extroverts, right? Well, guess what? Our introverts really need to think it through before they can vocalize it. And our extroverts want to talk it through, right? I mean, for introverts, I always say, no agenda, no attenda. If we're going to bring individuals together to have a conversation, I really need to be cognizant of who my introverts are, that I'm truly setting them up to be successful. Because if I don't, then they're probably not going to talk during that meeting. And that's a form of diversity, right? That's how we're getting some of that innovation. We have lots of different forms of diversity, but, we need to ensure that when we're bringing teams together, we're paying attention to what are the needs and how do we be able to meet each of these needs in order to get to the business outcomes and objectives that we're all aiming for. while being tied in so strongly with why are we doing this?
Yeah. And, Tracy, taking the time to know that about your staff and or about your colleagues is really important. And one of the things in education, in that industry in particular, I will tell you, is there's never enough dedicated think time or time to really collaborate well and know each other. And one of the things I often give advice to is sometimes my clients will push back and be like, we don't have time for this, Shelley. I understand, I'm hearing you, I'm with you. Yes, all of everything you just said is important, but we really have all these other conflicting priorities that have to happen now. The problem is that I would argue that you don't have time not to do this, because in fact, in education, we just see the wheel of the new thing, and it's going to start here. And then we go in through the hamster wheel, and then we spit it out again. And then we're never really setting root in these strong cultural behaviors that then allow staff, regardless of change in leaders, to still stay on that. And so, in fact, you're spending more time and money mitigating issues in the back, or I'll go back to return on investment. If I've got teachers spending most of their prep time, lunchtime complaining and frustrated, they're not doing the things that we want them to do, which is called teaching and learning, and focusing and supporting students or making parent contact or whatever that might be. We're just not really being efficient in what we're doing. So while yes, it's going to take time, and in education, in particular in that industry, you have to carve it out explicitly. But I will tell you, when you do that, research has shown that despite poverty or despite whatever trauma or trouble the building has been in, that will move student achievement. Just solely focusing on relationships and making sure that your staff is working at their highest potential and understanding and unlocking their genius in each other and looking at each other as a good, strong support system, that will make the difference.
And that's where it's fun, right? Because there's trust. You've got laughter in the hallway. You've got the shenanigan games going on, and the kids see that and they feed off of that, because then the learning is fun. And it's so interesting because, we do a lot of work with school districts specifically around climate surveys and exit interviews. Teaching's a tough gig right now, right? And it always has been, but it definitely is, especially with some of the things that have been happening, along with some of the teacher union changes, especially in Wisconsin over the last 10 years, et cetera. So with those things all changing, one of those things that we're seeing when we're doing these climate surveys and exit interviews is it's really coming down to trust. Do I have consistent leadership, and can I trust both my leaders to do what they say they're going to do in the best interest of the kids? And do I trust the team that I'm working with on a day-to-day basis? Because there's so many different things that come in, such as school safety and psychological safety and, the test scores, and all those things are important. But if the kids don't trust, there's going to be an issue, right? And so it's something interesting that we've seen, and it's just work that's so much fun because it's so impactful and meaningful.
And Tracy, you just basically described why our mission is what it is. And it is, honestly, we support educational systems to create the conditions for success and innovation. And I think that's the misstep in schools, is that you can buy all the computers, you can buy all the new latest and greatest curriculum. But if you don't have the conditions, the soil, right, to grow anything, you're not going to get success. And so it really is about what you were just describing, Tracy. Do the employees really feel like, oh my, so empowered? And one thing I know about educators, and it doesn't matter what their role is, man, they are so dedicated, and they will dedicate endless energy to feeling the passion for what they went into education for. But when you see a building where people are like, nope, time to leave, and really they're not even caring about that, I would say you probably want to stop and take a look at the system. And And the other thing I'll say it, I said it at the beginning, but I'll say it again. The assumption that adults know how to work together in highly effective ways is a huge misstep. We're not trained to do it. We're going to default to our natural, selfish, self-centered behaviors because we're humans. That's what we do. So part of what I think any organization really needs to consider is to what degree have they truly trained and supported with tools and shared agreements and shared understanding around how we work with each other, especially as our workforce becomes more diverse.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for that. And as we end all of our podcasts, what is one key takeaway that you have for our superintendents and our principals listening in today?
That truly there's a saying that we hear way too much in education, which is culture eats strategy for breakfast. Yes, that couldn't be more true. And so especially as things are shifting with COVID, focus on culture, focus on your workforce, and really take an assessment of how well they are situated to innovate and be successful. That will be your long-term strategy goal. So if you're playing the long game, go for culture, not just by the fancy curriculum. You might need that too. Don't get me wrong, but the long game is absolutely culture.
Love it. And what's one takeaway for our human resource listeners today?
Yeah, so I think especially if you are an HR professional supporting school systems, back to really listen and take note of where you're seeing opportunities to support staff around skills, making sure that they have those. If you're hearing some things bubble up, make those recommendations on how to really support people. And remember that conflict isn't a bad thing. Conflict is an opportunity, but are we handling it professionally? And if we're not, how do we mentor our staff to really handle and appreciate the differences that we all bring?
Love it. Thank you so much for being with us today. And if you are interested in getting in contact with Shelley or learning more about what CEC does or can do for your district, we will have their website in the show notes and a link to Shelley's LinkedIn profile. Also, if you're going, hey, I wonder who I am specifically, like what are my strengths, my styles? What does my team look like? I'll have a link for that in the show notes as well. So if you're like, hey, I want to know, what does our leadership team look like? We can definitely do that one-on-one team dynamics with your team so that you can see that. So with that, Shelley, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Tracy. Always a pleasure to work with you.
Absolutely. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Talent Optimization Podcast. You'll find more tools and resources for CEOs and HR professionals looking to bridge the strategies versus implementation gap of talent optimization at elevatedtalentconsulting.com. We've also created a free, valuable resource for you to begin bridging the gap called the Talent Optimization Foundation Membership Program. You can access it for free at elevatedtalentconsulting.com/foundation. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode to learn more about talent optimization and creating a dream team for your organization.